Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Dangerous Rhetoric. This is episode 101. Whew, that's a lot.
Yeah, we passed 100.
Yeah, I'm Brentley.
I'm Dan.
And we would like to remind you before we get into it with our fabulous guest today, Miss Sara Higdon. Don't forget, like, subscribe, comment, share the show with your friends. Just, all that little bit helps. We've been, really growing lately. We're over 1,000. We're almost ready for YouTube monetization. We just need a few thousand, I think more views or something, or hours viewed. I'm not sure what it is, but we're close.
Yeah, we're getting
so spread it around. Watch backlogs. If you really want to help, you can open up a video and let it play for your pets in the background while you're out of town, and that'll help us.
Until then, you can donate though.
Until then, you can give us money. There's links in the description.
Shout out to my friend Lisa for her very generous donation.
So generous,
Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Today we have the amazing, the based Sara Higdon. Sara is a veteran. She's a based transsexual. She is a content creator, a YouTuber, and speaker. Thank you so much, Sara, for joining us today. We really appreciate you
joining us again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, guys. Thanks for inviting me back on. It was fun last time, so maybe we'll get, have some more fun today.
Definitely.
Sure.
I wanted to get into your work. I wanted to talk about what you've been up to recently, because they just over the Christmas break, they kicked you off of Twitter because you said something very true. You said that, having gender dysphoria is a mental illness. It's in the DSM. It's very factual. And they nuked you on Twitter. How long were you nuked on Twitter for?
So, well, that was the whole thing about it. They put me on a 12-hour timeout, but which ended up being 48 hours because I didn't want to delete the tweet.
Right.
I kind of took that stance that I shouldn't have been deleted. This is a factual thing, and Elon said when he took over, this stuff shouldn't be happening. So, I decided I was going to raise it to be an issue and use my platform to raise awareness that this was still happening and it shouldn't be happening. And so, yeah, I do freelance writing for the Post Millennial. And so Libby Emmons, I sent her, just let her know what happened. They decided to run the story, and it was retweet. It was tweeted out by Andy No and retweeted by Seth Dillon, and even Dana Lash retweeted it. It got a lot of attention. And I ended up booking a Newsmax spot, but it was on that Friday. And so my account came back Wednesday evening. They didn't even send me an email, nothing. It just came back. I just checked it, and I'm it's back. I checked it at 4:00, and then at 6:00, it was back. And so they didn't say anything. And then I was talking to people about the conversation that was being had, and I said somebody was trying to compare being pansexual with what I said, saying pansexuality is a mental illness too. And I was like, well, it's really not, but here's why. Because it's kind of the same thing as being, bisexual with extra steps.
Basically.
For saying that, again, I got banned. So Friday morning, I'm going into my Newsmax interview, and then I'm like, yes, I've been taken off of Twitter, given another 12-hour suspension again. And so that took till Saturday evening. I actually ended up this time getting an apology letter from Twitter saying that we got this one wrong. And so I don't have any strikes on my account, and I was able to get the account back. And I hope that it kind of fixed the automatic flags that they have for, that stuff. Because even Carrie Smith she sent out what she was saying Sara Higdon's blocked out of her account for saying this. And apparently what we figured out is any combination of LGBT and the words mental disorder in any tweet, doesn't matter where they are in the tweet, will automatically throw a flag and put your account under suspension.
Wow.
So hopefully they got that fixed. I don't know. I haven't really checked to see. I know somebody posted something the same thing a couple weeks later, and I was like, now I want to see if you're here tomorrow. I forgot to go check though.
I guess you could test it out and tweet it again at some point and see if they nuke you.
And just for our audio listeners, Sara tweeted out, "It is mental disorder. I mean, when some wiring in your brain makes you feel more comfortable as the opposite sex, that's an illness, which I don't think we should stigmatize a mental illness." So
yeah,
mental illnesses makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I don't see what was so controversial about what you said, but to the
It's algorithmic, probably.
well, to the trans radical activists, yes, that is controversial, and I'm sure it might have not been algorithmic. They probably reported it.
Well, that's what I kind of said that on in the Newsmax article. It was really interesting because I appealed immediately, and I waited for the appeal to come back. And when they denied the appeal, I figured I was like, okay, well, somebody had to verify the appeal, so a person saw that, and so it was something more, egregious happening, because then somebody saw it and still determined that it was hateful, and they did that for both of the tweets. So I don't know if it's an automatic flagging or whatnot, but it still was an issue. And after this, I raised the question. I said, I'm a Twitter Blue member, so if you're going to pay for Twitter, I think that we should actually have a real life customer service person that will actually go in here and get your account back up as soon as possible, especially if you're paying. Like, if you're paying, that should be like a customer service issue. Like, let's do this as quickly as possible.
That's a good point, actually.
Right. Well,
you are a customer.
Literally any other service that you pay for, if you are not able to access the service, the company will give you a credit for that time period, or they will work very hard to get that service back to you as soon as possible so that you can legitimately pay for it.
Yeah, and I asked Twitter if they would. And obviously, I got no messages back. I said, hey, I mean, it would have been like $1, so it's not like anything, but it's like, I mean, like, I lost like almost a week of this, and I pay for this. So, but that's the thing, is in the Twitter, when you sign up for Twitter Blue, it says that if you are suspended or anything like that, the time off is like, you still get charged for it. But this was the thing, is even still, you guys admitted that it was your mistake. So that's a difference of, if it's not your mistake, okay, I got you. I still pay for that. But if it is your mistake, then you warranted this. But I guess the best thing about this whole thing is I probably gained about 1,000 followers within that week alone. That I had literally one tweet like that whole week, and it was like 1,000 followers more when I came back. I'm like, that's awesome.
Gotta love that.
The strides of the fact.
That's how it works, though. They try to like bury something and cover it and censor, and what they don't realize, it's you're attracting more attention to the ideas that you're trying to bury. It's similar to at some of these protests, like a lot of what the radical activists seem to do is they love to hold up their signs and their flags and to surround the person that they're trying to censor, and to literally like censor, to block you in real life by blocking you with their sign.
Yeah.
Which they did to Fred Sargent in Vermont, when Brent was over there with Josh Slocum for that protest. And what they don't realize is by surrounding the person whose ideas you're trying to block, you're actually bringing attention to that scene to them. And it's going to make more people ask, like, okay, well, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And then
that same thing happened last Thursday. I was in Wisconsin for an event, and this event had a ton of people. And after the event, like one of the local newspapers ran basically a hit piece because it was protested. I felt honored because I was protested for the first time in my career. So, I mean, it means I've made it. And so, but it was these trans activist protesters that were labeling it as, a transphobic event because, Jamie Michelle from Gays Against Groomers was supposed to be there. Chloe Cole was there. And it's interesting. And then the organizer was what her school filed a lawsuit for her, a defamation suit against her, but then it was quickly thrown out because it was all she was doing was talking about the books that were in their library and stuff like that. So it was like parents have a free speech right. So it was quickly dismissed. The article didn't mention how it was dismissed. It just said that she was sued, and it only mentioned Chloe Cole and Jamie in the article. And if the reporter had even stepped inside of the building, which all reporters were given free access to this event, they would have realized that Jamie, unfortunately, was not able to make it. And then they would have also listened to me, who was there. And then you have Jeanette Cooper from Parents for Ethical Care, who considers herself a radical feminist. And then you had Corey Brewer, who is a lawyer up in Wisconsin. And so you have a radical feminist and a trans person that are sitting right next to each other. We probably disagree on quite a bit of stuff, but we both agreed that we can, you know, fight to protect children. And then you have the organizer of the event who is a very strong, like, Republican, like a Trump supporting Republican. And so all these wide range of views were there, but they just made it seem like it was a hit piece and just an attack on trans people this whole time. And so it's like, okay, you guys can write this, but guess what? It's just going to give us more promotion, because now you've even made people be like, well, what was this event really about? And I'm like, it's okay. The video is going to come out in a couple weeks. You can go there and determine for yourself and see exactly what we were saying. And it was, but it's they make the promotion for us.
Yeah.
When I did an event with No Left Turn Education in Richmond, Virginia, Eventbrite took that listing down.
Oh my.
Yeah, so we were doing a screening of Matt Walsh's What is a Woman, followed by a panel discussion afterwards. And because they took that down, it got attention. And Matt Walsh on his show mentioned that event by name, mentioned me by name, and to talk about how ridiculous it was that a movie about trans people followed by a discussion with trans people was basically deemed to cause harm against supposedly trans people. Like, that was like how he said it. And it was like, and so it just, and again, so Matt Walsh's, you know, million followers on Twitter gave us huge promotion for this event because Eventbrite decided that they were going to do something like that.
You brought up an important point that I think is, you know, worth reiterating here, and it's that people who disagree on some of these subjects but agree that the goal is to protect children and to make sure that the least amount of harm comes to children, people in general, but especially children, by promoting this affirm approach without any pushback and questioning.
Yeah.
That's what matters here. Like, you brought up Matt Walsh. Like, I'm sure Matt Walsh and us don't agree on quite a few things. I know his takes on gay marriage differ than mine. But I'm willing to ally with Matt Walsh and to stand with him for the fight to protect kids. Like, we don't have to agree on necessarily everything, and that's fine. It doesn't mean that we can't have this sort of common ground and still stand together for something that we do actually agree on. And that's what's important, because there's so much, like, there's a lot of infighting that's still happening. And we've had Billboard Chris on the show a couple times, and a lot of the radical feminists, they hate him. They can't stand him. They accuse him of all this stuff of misogyny. But when you really analyze their stance, it seems really what's going on with them is misandry, and they don't like that a man is fighting in this movement and becoming, I guess, a face of the movement, when he doesn't care about any of that, doesn't want to be a face of the movement. And another thing too is this isn't a movement that is just affecting women. It's also erasing men. It's erasing the idea of biological sex in general. So that affects everyone. So it's all of our movement. It's not a movement that is just for women, even though it has like a more, I guess you could say, an increased effect on women because of the disparity of force between men and women and how men can now be in women's spaces. I understand that. And that even the trans thing, the ideology of it seems to be affecting young girls more than young boys, but it doesn't mean young boys aren't being affected, and that it's not our fight as well, especially as gay men, you know? So it's like, to tell us we can't be a part of this because we have a penis, it's like, dude, you're slowing down the progress of this when we should be uniting.
Well, that's what's interesting is, and you brought up a really interesting point, because the current trend is young females that are being affected by this, but a lot of the attacks on trans people are about trans males.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's like, that's the biggest issue with some of these people is trans males, like, doing different things, like you said, accessing women's spaces and stuff like that. And it's like, but then you have the young girls who are mostly being affected by it. So, like, it's like, where do you put your priorities, and what are you actually fighting for? Are you fighting for the young girls who are being manipulated and told that they're trans simply because they're not comfortable going through normal puberty?
Yeah, and then there's the other side of that too, where those girls turn into trans men, right? You know, and when they're adults, they're coming into male spaces, gay spaces, and claiming to be gay men. So they're actually appropriating, like, who we are. So that's my point, is like, it is also our fight. I'm not saying they can physically harm us, but a lot of them are trying to shame gay men into sleeping with them and saying that there's something wrong with us and we're bigots if we don't view them as what they're presenting as and what they say they are. And it's like, dude, you're erasing homosexuality, which is not something we've identified into. This is something we just are. And then we had to come to terms with that, which was a process for us. And you're just saying, well, no, I mean, we can identify as that. And it's like, isn't that the same as saying that we chose this?
Yeah. And that doesn't get brought up enough because, again, like you said, it is interesting because a lot of the attention goes to, the trans women who are trying to do that same thing to lesbians.
Yes.
And it shows a lot of, like you said, it is still like the patriarchy at work. But the same thing does happen to a lesser extent to men and to gay men, especially, to be like, if you don't date me, you're a bigot or anything like that. It's like, no, same-sex attraction is still same-sex attraction. And there can be some gray in there as well for some people that may be okay with dating trans people, but it's not bigoted to still not want to date somebody of this opposite sex, no matter who they are.
Yeah, this also leads into something that I wanted to chat with you about today, and it's something Billboard Chris talks about. He spoke about it on the last episode of the show that he came on, and he basically says that being gay or being homosexual, right, gay or lesbian, isn't something you identify as. It really is just something that we are this way. We didn't pick it. We can't control it. Sure, we can choose to act on it or not. That's a whole nother discussion, but we didn't choose to have that sexual orientation. So sexual orientation is not something that you identify into. Whereas, he says trans is something that you do. It's more a verb. It's a process that you undergo. What do you think?
So in a way that's accurate. I would say it's more so in line with what you said as that it's how it's a choice. The choice is how you deal with it, because I guess being trans is the choice, but having gender dysphoria is not.
Yes.
And so that's the key right there too, is like, I had a choice to transition or not to transition, and I made the choice to make myself more comfortable living out the way that I want to. Kind of the same way as it would be if a gay person was like, I am more comfortable, I'm attracted to men, but I'm just going to abstain because I don't feel right, I'm not doing it. So that's the choice. It's the choice to act on it. Where in this society, and what we're seeing in trans activism, when you don't even have to have a gender dysphoria diagnosis to consider yourself, to transition and stuff like that, that's where the waters get really muddy, and it does become just kind of something that you can identify as. Because for a long time, I still feel this way. I hate the term identify.
Yeah.
Just like I hate the term, I hate the term lifestyle when it comes to anything LGBT. It's not a lifestyle. It's my life. It's who I am. It's not something that I choose to go and act in this lifestyle. It's who I'm attracted to, not the way I live. And so being trans is kind of the same thing. It's not something that I identify. Well, I guess being trans would be an identity, but having gender dysphoria is not something I identify. I don't identify as a woman. I am a trans woman. That's kind of the difference, right? I made the choice to transition because of the disorder that I have.
So on that note, and you used the word disorder here, and relating to the tweet that you put out that you got banned for, do you think that maybe we should go back to the old term that was used to describe this, which wasn't gender dysphoria, it was gender identity disorder? And this was Kenneth Zucker was the researcher who first started looking into this phenomenon, and that was how he categorized it. And then that sort of changed when
he wasn't the first one to look into it. He was just the most prominent doing
one
it in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So that's what it used to be called. And then as soon as they started removing that from the DSM, they used the term now gender dysphoria.
Yeah, so that's I mean, I think a lot of times when we talk about words, it shouldn't matter what it's called, gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. They're one and the same to me when I look at it. The issue is the fact that it was removed from, the classification was changed. And there's a lot of the reasons why it was changed. I don't think it would be as big of an issue. I actually think it might help if you changed it back to gender identity disorder, because people get confused with what dysphoria is and what body dysmorphia is.
Yes.
And they don't realize that those two things are basically opposite concepts with some overlaps, right? So this is why I don't like the word delusion when it comes to trans people either, is because I'm not delusional, because it's what I actually see in the mirror. It's those secondary sex characteristics that make me uncomfortable with my body.
Meaning
Whereas
it's not like you're looking in the mirror and you're seeing yourself as the opposite sex. You're seeing your actual sex's characteristics, and that's what's causing the discomfort.
Yeah, and that's a mental thing. Again, it's a mental thing that is causing me this distress. It's not that I'm seeing something. It's not that I'm born in the wrong body. It's that my brain is distressed. I guess that's the best way to put it. Which is, again, and so that's why, again, like you wouldn't treat somebody with anorexia by telling, affirming. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, because again, it's the opposite type. It's not really related. And so
they look in the mirror and they have this inaccurate, almost delusion of themselves, where they see themselves as very fat or overweight.
Exactly.
And that is what drives their anxiety. Whereas you see reality, you see your male secondary characteristics, and that's what actually triggers the anxiety.
Body dysmorphia is also very common when you start working out. And now I know this from my own experience, where I look at myself in the mirror sometimes, and I know
so
that
skinny. I need to be bigger.
I know that I have gotten bigger, but it's almost like I don't see it, and I don't feel like
bigger.
Yes, 20 pounds bigger, but I don't see it, and
Not
I feel like
enough
I
for her.
haven't gotten big enough. Other people tell me, they're like, no, you look fine, or you've put on weight and that sort of thing. But it's like I have a bit of that dysmorphia where I don't see the reality of it. I want to be larger, and I feel like I'm still just as skinny as I was a year ago when I'm not.
Well, and that's why I say there is some overlap, though, because this is what happens is a lot of trans people, you may see a lot of very passable trans people. And actually Blair White's talked about her own issues with this. Like you see a very passable trans person to the outside world, they probably present, very well, but that person still sees every single thing that clocks them. And so they want to have more surgeries, or they need to do more. They need to, they're not passing. So that is more of a seeing not what everybody else sees, but you're seeing too much of what's there, and it's probably not. So it can overlap a lot. And I think that's, I think Blair's talked about her eating disorders and stuff like that, because it causes kind of the same issue. So they can overlap, but they're kind of opposite concepts at the same time. But like what we were talking about too is changing the term, so that could help with some of the confusion between the two concepts. As well, like it was people don't realize why it was removed from the classification was changed from a mental disorder to a sexual health disorder, which is actually what homosexuality is listed as, a sexual health disorder as well. And the only reason why it was changed is they say it was to reduce the stigma, but there shouldn't be stigma against mental illnesses. That gives all other mental illnesses a stigma in and of itself, even as you're trying to destigmatize mental illness.
It's like at that point, you might as well remove them all from the DSM. Right?
Yeah, if you're worried about stigmas, but at the same time, it was moved to a sexual health disorder because while it is therapists who give a gender dysphoria diagnosis, it is like endocrinologists and other doctors that are, prescribing the treatment and monitoring the treatment. It's not the therapist. So for coding purposes, in terms of like health insurances and stuff paying for it, that makes more sense. So it makes more sense when it looks at like the paperwork side of things, but not as much when it comes to the practicality of what the disorder actually is.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. It could at least lessen some of the confusion, especially because like the word dysphoria is similar to dysmorphia. And even I think have confused them at some points, but like you said, they're not the same concept.
The language is just really, it's something we have to sort of like work around and play with, because on the one hand, there's like, most of us that are trying to honestly and genuinely find out what works best for the most people. And then you have sort of the activists that are just pushing an agenda regardless of the objective data. And they just lie. They just lie nonstop.
Well, they also interpret any conversations that question how we approach this
as an attack, which is deceptive.
Deceptive, yes, because we should be able to discuss these things, and just because we raise some questions doesn't mean that, say, like, I view Sarah as not human anymore, and I'm erasing your existence, and it's absurd. We need to be able to have these conversations and to have them honestly. And the more they shut down that dialogue, I don't see that as doing a service to anyone, really. It's not doing a service to people who, say, might need more understanding of what people like you go through, and it's not doing a service to people like you who are going through it.
Yeah, and that's why I always talk about we should always be open to the conversation and willing to listen and to everybody's perspective on this stuff. And I think too much right now, we all just want to be right, and we don't want to. There's so much. Everybody's so hardlined right now, to where I think that if we work together, we can actually come to a lot of solutions to most of the issues somewhere in the middle, like where, come to solutions that pretty much work for everybody, or at least, 90% of the people out there. But most people aren't willing to have that conversation. And it's really interesting. I was just reading an article before we came on. It was about how medical professionals, medical schools are going to even talking about pronouns and stuff like that, and the languages that they use. And while after they expected that this person that was teaching in this medical, that was giving a seminar in this medical school about this stuff, was going to basically either get, widely applause or, just silently agreement. Well, they had 45 questions afterwards, and they said that, and the person that hosted the speech said about 80% of those questions were considered transphobic to him. I was like, so medical students are questioning, and while the leaders are pushing like the GLAD stuff, like it's all GLAD stuff and all this woke stuff, the people that are in these courses are pushing back. So that at one, that kind of looks like it's a white pill, because people are smart and they can see what's going on, and it doesn't make functional sense, to where it could also, if you look at it a different way, it could also black pill you, because you see all these kids are now being indoctrinated so many people are being indoctrinated into this ideology as well, going through these medical schools. It's kind of insane. And language is interesting, because I think I'm probably going to put a tweet out today, because I have been seeing this more and more. I didn't even realize this was an issue, whether to put a space between trans woman. So either trans space woman or trans woman as a whole. I'm like, I don't really care. They're the same thing. Why does it matter to anybody? But it's an issue to people on both sides of the issue. I'm like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it is. Oh God, it's frustrating, because there's all these other things happening in the world right now, and
I know.
And this topic very much dominates a lot of the conversation, and I understand why. It is an important thing. I mean, it's like we're standing up for biological reality. It's kind of the last,
kind of fundamental.
Yeah, it's fundamental. It's like the tip of the spear,
and they're targeting children, which naturally makes all of us adults very angry.
But at the same time, a lot of it gets kind of caught up in these really nitty-gritty details like that, over putting a space in between a prefix and the word woman, etc. And I don't know, it gets tiresome. It's like, oh my God, all this other crap is happening in the world right now. We're here arguing about spaces,
or I mean, pronouns in general. I mean, actually, if you guys saw, Reality's Last Stand, Colin Wright put together a great symposium of views from all different people. Even had, what was her name? I forget. The other super far lefty trans person that was on there. So but it was just a wide range of views on pronoun use. It's like, why are we? I participated because I have my views on it, and I think I want to shape that. I want to talk about that narrative, But at the same point in time, it's like you said, there's so much other stuff. Like, this is just distracting us from not being able to talk about children and everything like that. And one of the examples that I used in my piece was from Austin Peterson. And if you guys know Austin, he ran for president as a libertarian, and then he ran for Congress a couple times as a Republican.
Yeah, I follow Austin.
And
I'm not familiar with him.
he's been a friend of mine for a little while, and I've been on all of his shows that he's had, and he's been on my show. And the first time he was on my show, he explained it like this, and because we were talking about this little pronoun thing, this was again a year ago, and he said, maybe even 2 years ago, I don't know, but he said that one of the reasons why because he uses she, her for me, uses my name and everything like that. But he'll use, like, when it comes to a leftist, he'll use the wrong pronouns for that person. That way, so that they get so caught up in that debate on pronoun use, while we're making actual real changes over here. So that it's a distraction over here while we're actually passing bills and everything like that. That's actually protecting people. So get them focused over here. And again, that's a Saul Alinsky tactic. So it's using Saul Alinsky tactics against them.
Yeah, I think, Peterson has kind of, Jordan Peterson, when he was at, not Austin Peterson, when he was asked about
no
this,
relation.
No relation.
Yeah, they're actually, it's E-N and O-N. It's different.
Yeah. But when he was asked about this, and I remember this was a few years ago, probably in like 2017, his answer was something along the lines of, I think they asked him if a student requested that he use the pronouns. His response was something along the lines of, it would depend on the motivation behind them asking, because his whole thing is compelled speech. So if he feels like the motivation is a sort of controlling one, then his answer is definitely like a hard no. Like, he's not going to use them. And I think that approach is similar to what Austin's doing here. It's like, well, these activists, they don't respect me, so I don't respect them. So I have no reason to use the pronouns.
Exactly. And that's what I said in my piece on there. I said it, and because the whole thing got brought up because Colin and Christina, they both use, she, her, they call me she, her, and that caused a lot of rifts with, some of the radical feminists who are hardline on that issue. And they're like, well, you use she, her when it comes to your friends, but you wrote this piece on, not, responding when they say, asking you what your pronouns is. And it was like, he was talking specifically about the ritual of asking somebody's pronouns and stuff like that, not participating in that, not talking about like what you do, like when it comes to like your friends or people who are respectful and everything like that to you. Because I wrote in my piece that I said, I do not compel speech. I don't believe it compelled speech. I can determine how your speech affects me. The thing about pronouns is that they happen usually when the person's not there. So when I'm not there, it really doesn't, I don't care. It's like, it's none of my business how you refer to me when I'm not there. The other thing is I've had a lot of people who are, pretty religious conservatives, and that they'll be like, Sarah, I respect you and I want to respect you, but I can't in good conscience use she, her pronouns for you. So what should I do? And that's when I just say, use my name. It's my legal name. It's, it should be no issue to use my name because, again, I changed it, everything like that. It's no different than using somebody's married last name. And so you can just use my name if you really want to be respectful to me and you don't want to use, certain pronouns for me. I really don't care. I'm not going to tell you what to do either way.
Yeah, and you can't either. At the end of the day, we can't control what anyone does or says and how they refer to us, only how we respond to it.
I find the whole debate just so ridiculous because as a gay man living in New York City, we were referring to other gay men as girl, honey, she, bitch, queen. We invented misgender.
I know.
And made it fun and, entertaining.
It wasn't like a serious
thing. It was never, it was never hateful. It was never bigoted. It was never a wrong thing to jokingly misgender, your friends or whatever.
Well, and it happens, and it still happens all the time in gay circles, right? Like in the community, it happens all the time. Like I heard you say it earlier when referring to it. It's like,
I do it all the time. I refer to my gay male friends as she, her, queen. Just I don't think about it. It's secondhand, and that's really kind of what pronouns are supposed to be. Secondhand, not thinking about it. So whenever like somebody sort of compels or like they try to tell you how to use it, just no, I don't. And I've had the same debate with people on the right. I've had people on the right say, "Oh, well, you'll refer to Blair White or Sarah.
Yeah, that's what Sarah.
If you had her on your show, you'll refer to her. Was she her pronoun? Yes, because I don't think about it, and you present feminine, so in your name's Sarah, which is, to me is a girl name, so I refer to you with girl pronouns. Also, that's just the way I am.
People like Blair have had so much work done that they do pass pretty well, and I know not everyone looks at Blair and sees a woman though, because I have showed pictures of Blair to some of my straight male friends, and a couple of them have been able to identify like, oh, that's a dude. Although they may have suspected that I was trying to trick them. So
Yeah.
in a certain way, who knows? They may not
Well,
have actually
you're
seen
right.
it through.
That's what happens a lot. That
Yeah.
happens a lot in society, right? A lot of these people that think that they can clock trans people
Yes.
all the time and everything like that, there is a sort of a confirmation bias there,
Yeah,
because it's like
for
every
sure.
trans person you see, well, one, you don't know if the person's actually trans because you're probably not going to go up and ask them.
Right.
And there are some women who get mistaken for women, like trans people all the time as well. Detransitioners are not, I mean, that's one of the bad things about that is they will always be seen at, or sometimes they will be seen as trans but the opposite. So they will be seen as like if they go back to their original sex, sometimes they will be seen as trans but that they're the opposite sex, right? Because they took testosterone for long enough, and it's usually the young girls. They take testosterone long enough, testosterone makes permanent changes that you can't correct, like voice and everything like that. And so you go back and some people might be like, oh, you're trans. No, I'm detrans. Like it's a huge issue when you're looking at, and that's what a lot of people kind of fail to realize some of that stuff as well, when they talk about
Richie,
different
Tulip R on Twitter, Richie
Yep.
posts about this sometimes as well. It's like that, oh, people can always tell. It's like, no, they can't. And he said
Yeah.
he gets confused all the time, and people still ask his pronouns and all that. And
Yep.
he's also dealing with a lot right now with the hormones and detransing and all that stuff. He had to stop taking testosterone because it was making him feel like shit. So even
that's what's interesting. Yeah.
Make him detrans still, because say
Well,
he's estrogen now, and he's like, all of this, he's like, none of that really matters. It's like, just do what's going to work best for you.
No, you're right. And there's something, and I don't know what it is, because and I've been seeing a trend lately, and it's something with the testosterone that they're giving now. And apparently, though, I've heard that it's a different formula that they give here in the US than what they give over in the UK. So it's a little bit different type of testosterone. But I've seen I've seen a few trans men that have had to come off of their testosterone, and so then they get back into some of these dysphoria inducing areas, whereas and so when you see like people that are having to come off their testosterone for health reasons, not because that necessarily they're detransing, it puts a little bit of a question in your mind. And again, that's kind of the point to say that we don't even still know what's going on with testosterone, like you said, and it has to do with the synthetic testosterone that they're giving. Because if Richie is having those things, it's not necessarily that it's going into a female body. It's just the type of testosterone that they're given, because Richie's body is made for testosterone as a male. And so how is that it's still affecting him? And it has to be something to do with it being synthetic. But then like Buck Angel talks about now, like he doesn't know what it is now because it's affecting younger bodies more than it's ever affected him, other than when he was younger, he went through all the complications to get where, to kind of the experiments and stuff like that to get to where we are now today. And so it's really interesting because now he's like, I haven't had issues with testosterone for years. But there's something weird.
If you've had the bottom surgery or not, as a male, that is how that's going to affect you, because Richie is post-op.
Well, yeah.
Whereas it might affect someone who is detransing, and is a male who didn't have the surgery and still has their parts intact and all of that.
Well, it would. So the thing is if you don't have the surgery and you detrans, you can pretty much just come off estrogen and then your body will start producing testosterone again. Yeah. And so you don't have to inject. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's such a tricky topic, and people get so upset about all of it. And like we were talking about the pronouns before, and I think I brought this up last time we spoke to you too, but like Blair White even got Ben Shapiro to admit that in certain social situations, Ben Shapiro would use she, her pronouns for Blair, because Blair passes. And say you're around other people who don't know that Blair is actually a male, and you start saying he, him to Blair, that would confuse them in a social situation. They're gonna be like, why are you calling that woman he, him? So
no, you're right.
Yeah.
Ben, I think what it was that Ben Shapiro had said was that he would use it in social situations, but when you're talking like on a panel or with an audience and stuff like that, he wants to be technically accurate. He wants to be very factual based and accurate, so he's not going to. But in a social setting, he might. Which is, again, that's understandable, especially where he's coming from. So I mean, I have no issues with stuff like that.
Totally. Sarah, let me ask you. I've seen a lot on Twitter of people trying to use queer as this new umbrella term for gay culture, trans culture. How do you feel about that? Because I'll say how I feel about it later.
So what we have to understand is queer is derived. Basically, it's an ideology. So if you identify as queer, you take part in queer ideology. There was even the TikTok that they admitted it, and it's part of the ideology. And it doesn't necessarily you don't even have to be, homosexual or bisexual or even trans to be part of the queer ideology. You can just self-identify into this, and you're queer. Again, it's based off of queer theory, which is a postmodern neo-Marxist idea. And so what I kind of talk about, because I still think that the LGBT with the original T meaning transsexual, the original, is separate. And I don't like putting like non-binary and all that stuff under the T because it doesn't make sense. Where they're not actually trans, they're not transitioning to anything. So they would be more marked non-binary or queer. And so the LGBT is being erased by the non-binary and the queer community because it's postmodernism. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, being called transphobic for not wanting to date trans people. It's this notion that there is no such thing as absolute truth, which is in and of itself an absolute truth that they think that, but that's what postmodernism is. And so to them, in a lot of ways, sexuality is not even a thing. So it's a clear divide that they don't even believe that LGBT or transsexuals are a thing. And so how are you supposed to move forward in the same community if you can't even agree that homosexuality is homosexuality, that's even a thing. And so I think that there's a clear divide.
Slur for us for being
homosexual. Exactly.
That originally was. Well, originally it just meant weird or strange. If you like, I didn't learn the word queer from hearing it thrown at me as a slur. I first learned the word queer when I was reading Lord of the Rings in 7th grade, and the word was used in Lord of the Rings by Tolkien to refer to something strange or weird. So that was my first introduction to it. It wasn't until I got older that I realized there were all of these political connotations and stuff surrounding that word. So
it is interesting because, again, words change meanings based on how they're used, and I think in different parts of the world it still is used simply to mean weird or strange. So if you look at it being weird or strange, like queer activists are literally calling themselves weird and strange, and then they would call you
that way.
I think so too. I mean, that's when you look. It's like, again, we refer back to it, and it's like the goth community when I was in school, and it's like they don't want to conform to society's rules, but then they all look the same and act the same and do all the same things. It's the same. It's the haircut. It's the look. Like everything all looks the same. I mean, look what happened to Demi Moore when she went queer. And then look at what happened when Sam Smith, when he went queer. Like they all do the same types of things. So it's like, and it's all to be counterculture, which would technically be considered weird.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to mention one other thing too, relating to what you said. Like you mentioned that like non-binary people don't really count because they're not transitioning into anything, which is sort of true. But it's more like they're like transitioning into like a nothing that is not included in any. And I say that because a lot of them are also getting surgeries. We spoke with Camille Kiefel on the show for, I think that was episode 99. And Camille had a non-binary top surgery, and that's where they remove
the nipples.
They take the nipples off and all of that stuff. And it's not designed to look like a male, and it's obviously you're not looking like a female anymore. It's this sort of in between space. Camille also didn't want to get put on testosterone and didn't take testosterone. So
which is actually, I should be more clear.
Into something, but not necessarily the other sex, but like something that's not even like based on any example in nature.
Yeah. And I should actually be more clear, because originally when non-binary was a thing, it was just the look and everything like that. But then they started medicalizing. And I guess I found out maybe a year and a half ago. It's been a little while since I remember hearing about like the non-binary marketed surgeries and stuff like that, because it's not just, top surgeries, which they're doing top surgeries, not adding nipples. And so a lot of times it's not to be non-binary. It's just because I guess it costs more or something like that. And it's hard. And so it's just really weird. Like they wouldn't add nipples, and it makes, And then now they're doing gender nullification surgeries, basically turning you into a eunuch. Yeah. Nullification.
So just taking everything
off, turning you into a eunuch underneath, like everything. And then the one that I did hear that was I heard a surgeon talk about it on a podcast one time, talking about how this was again about a year and a half ago, getting more and more questions about possibly doing a vaginoplasty, but keeping the penis.
I've heard
and
this.
And so that's becoming more and more popular, I guess, too. But nobody really talks about it. Nobody talks about the surgeries that they had, because it is genital surgery. So it's like, but what kind of surgery did you have? And so you can go on Reddit boards and find people that have had different types of surgeries, but it's not really that widely promoted. And it's like, but it's just like they're trying, like you said, they're trying to transition into a nothingness, which is even new compared to what it was. And some people are taking light testosterone, some people are not taking testosterone. It's, again, when you talk about gender as a spectrum, like the amount of stuff that people do is a huge spectrum in terms of this as well, which is very concerning.
There's no real medical standard for
what
this is all experimental.
It's all experimental. It's all a la carte. It's all whatever you want. It's the customer is always right. And I'm just like,
that's not how you're supposed to practice medical care.
It's not medicine.
Yeah. Well, I talked about this actually, and I got a little bit of heat, but I talked about this on the panel last week. I said, I would prefer, what's happening a lot is that
somewhere?
It's going to be put out. It should be put out within the next week or so, I would assume. It's not out yet, and I probably will post it to my YouTube channel when it comes out. But like, what's happening a lot right now is doctors are putting these things off as like promoting these as like these magic cures for dysphoria and all this stuff, and they're hyping it up and they're pushing it. And I would rather a doctor for an adult, not for children. Nothing should be done to children until they're 18. But for an adult, I would rather them just say, we don't know what we're doing. This is just an experiment, but it's your body, your choice. You can do whatever you want. I would be okay with that. Well, more than I would be okay with what they're actually doing right now. Because right now they're manipulating and pushing it out. Yeah. Okay. It's like, hey, if you want to experiment on me, you have the right to experiment on your body,
And here are the complications that could arise from that.
Like, but and then there's a whole nother issues of complications that we don't know that could arise because we don't even know what we're doing. It's all experimental at this point. I believe that as an adult, you have self-ownership and you have a right to experiment with your body and do whatever you want with it. But you have to know that it's nobody else's fault but your own sometimes when you do take these things. But when you have a doctor who is actually out there manipulating and pushing this stuff on people and telling people that you're probably trans, you probably need this, you need this, you need this, then that is medical malpractice because you're lying to people.
Yep. Or telling parents that their children are very likely to self-delete if they don't do this, that, and the third. Agreed.
Well, that's the issue that I try to fight the most. And that's where I focus a lot of attention is, especially when, again, we were talking about earlier, it's when it comes to kids. I'm not as concerned with adults. I think that there is a lot of room to tell adults that, a lot of adults are going to have good opportunities to possibly sue their doctors because they were not given proper, or they were actually lied to and they were kind of pushed into something when it wasn't what was right for them. But I think children are the worst example because you're right. What they're telling parents, and they're usually telling parents in front of those children, and that it puts an idea into that child's head that that's what's going to happen, and then it almost creates a foregone conclusion if you don't let that child transition. It's just a mess, and it's just so evil what's happening to our children right now.
It is. No, I agree. That is definitely the more important thing to focus on. But I think bringing up how it's affecting adults and how we should be talking to adults is also important, because every detrans person we've spoken with on the show so far, and we've spoken to 4 now, I think, right? I think it's 4. All transitioned after the age of 18. Some of them in their late 20s, almost 30. So it's an issue. Clearly, there are a lot of adults who are not being informed. Like, hey, this is experimental. Here's all the things that could go wrong. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Are you sure? They're being just affirmed.
Just push it. Yep. And that's what needs to. And that's part of the issue when it comes to, like, you have like a lot of the therapists right now are affirming, and they're not able to do their job. And now we're seeing like these, anti-conversion therapy bills, including gender and stuff like that. And well, conversion therapy as a whole, no matter what, is wrong. But the lines get blurred when you start to be like, well, you have to affirm, and if you don't affirm, then that's conversion therapy. And instead, therapists need to be able to question somebody about whether this is what it really is and what it's not. And affirmation only care completely wipes that away. You're not doing your due diligence as a therapist to be able to push that. As well as, I think this.
It sort of becomes conversion therapy in and of itself.
It does.
When you look at the amount of people who are detransitioning that realize later they were just gay or lesbian.
Well, it's the transing the gay away, right? It is very similar to a conversion therapy. When you're telling anybody who's gender nonconforming that they're probably trans, then that is absolutely conversion therapy. And even the adult detransitioners, they are so important to this fight right now, because when it comes to, again, giving what actual information and giving people the ability to like give informed consent, adult detransitioners tell the stories of what could happen. And so their voices are uniquely important, because they are saying, this wasn't right for me. You shouldn't do this. You should wait. You should take your time. Even as an adult, you need to take your time. And so trying to silence that is not giving a full picture, accurate information, because I think we do our own we have to do our own research a lot of times. Like, I think COVID taught us that doctors are not going to protect us. They are out for their own interest. And so I don't trust my doctors. I go and do all this research that we have to do, and having detransitioners who are out here speaking out is very important. And I don't put any blame on the detransitioners, the adult detransitioners that are out here right now, because when they transitioned, there was nobody out here telling them the opposite effects. And so there was nobody like them out here talking about this. So that's why they are in a unique position, because this information wasn't out there when they transitioned. And so
it also shows that even as adults, you're not always sure what you want or what you should do and who you are. So if even adults aren't all sure of that, what the hell makes people think that kids are? So it's
absolutely
important, yes, that they tell their story.
And part of it too is these adults who and it's a lot of these adults who transitioned, who somehow think that their life would have been so much better if they would have been able to transition when they were a child, kind of pushing it onto children. It's like, that's kind of oh, you have to affirm, because if I was affirmed, I would be so much better off in life, which, one, that's not guaranteed. You have no idea.
Right.
And two, almost every, the studies show that most of the people that are feeling this way are not going to, remain, or they're going to desist by, they're probably going to desist. And all the studies are wildly inaccurate about this topic too.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of ideological sort of contamination. It's so controversial now. It's like, it's going to be really hard to trust the conclusions of researchers.
Yeah.
They're actually, giving you honest, objective information.
I forget who it was.
Yeah,
I forget who it was. Maybe a month or so ago, it might have even been longer, said, we're going to get probably 5 to 10 years down the road, we're going to be at a point where there's more detransitioners than there are trans people.
Yes,
it's possible.
Yes,
It's
because
very
it was
possible.
supposed to be something that was rare. It was a
Yeah.
rare thing. So the fact that it has become more common, like the argument that the radical activist types give is that, oh well, society has become more accepting, therefore more of them feel more comfortable to come out. Yet at the same time, you say that, oh, they're hunting us down everywhere and we're in danger. Which is it? Is society more
Yeah.
accepting, or are you being hunted down everywhere and you're in danger? Because you can't have both narratives at once.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's actually the opposite, where society is so accepting. Like when you actually look at the stats, and the stats came out like a couple months ago too, maybe even not that long, but it came out to show like in last year, I think it was something like 32 trans people were murdered. And then if you look at the reasons why they were murdered, it's usually, prostitution or drug related and stuff like this, or domestic abuse and all this stuff. It's not because they're actually trans. But even the 32 number, the total number, is still less of a percentage than the actual like normal murder rate for the society. So it's almost like there is a, trans people are less likely to be murdered than anybody else in the world.
Yeah. And like you said, having to do with like drugs and prostitution, and especially the prostitution thing, like how many of those people were, say, not confiding in the people that they were taking to bed, that they were trans, and that could be a really dangerous thing. Someone could have
Yeah.
like a pretty extreme reaction
Well,
to that. I'm not saying
established
yeah.
legal precedent now that it's surprised
Yeah.
that is a
it's like a temporary
useful-
insanity.
They have defendants have successfully used that defense in order to avoid suffering severe consequences for murdering a trans person because they were shot.
Have they?
Yeah, I believe it was I think it was in California, actually. I can't remember the story,
Oh.
but I know that it's been successfully used at least once.
Yeah, I didn't know if it had ever been used, because I had heard stuff about that, but that is kind of the gay panic defense, right? Where it's every time it's been tried in court up until maybe this new one that I hadn't heard about, it had been shot down in court, but it's been tried a couple times, but it was never successfully used, right? It's like, no, you can't just say that you can't just murder somebody because you're in the fit of rage,
and I'm not saying that that's okay, but what I am saying,
no, it's not.
People are going to have, if you tricked them in
Well,
that way and they didn't know, someone's going to have an extreme reaction to that. And I'm sure that happens all the time, and most of the time they probably don't murder the person, but I'm sure they freak out and they get very upset and they kick the person out and that sort of
absolutely thing. It is so dangerous to not disclose that.
Yes.
I hate when you see a lot of these activists pushing this, that you don't have to, you don't have to disclose to this person. I'm like, why would you sleep with somebody who you don't even feel comfortable disclosing this to? And it's so dangerous. And it's akin to, it's rape. You don't know, you're not, fully upfront and open with somebody, and you're essentially, tricking somebody into a homosexual relationship when they're not homosexual. It's like, it could be very much akin to rape. It's sleeping with somebody under false pretenses.
It's rapey for sure.
It's not cool.
That's like, it's so easy. I have it down to a science on how I present to people. Like if I actually start feeling like an attraction towards somebody, it's like, that's the first thing I bring up, because I want to see how they react. I want to see, their reactions. If they react poorly, then I'm like, okay, well, I dodged a bullet,
Well, you want to be able to be with someone who knows who you are and your story and can accept the whole of that. Why would you want to have to lie to someone about that?
Yeah, it's also an issue with hookup culture in and of itself. And it's like, you just want to be able to go out and hook up with anybody without any thought to it. And so it's like, well, maybe you should at least tell them that you're trans, even if it's just a one night stand,
Or maybe we should
avoid hooking up.
Should start to seriously, reflect on hookup culture in general.
Well, that's
in the gay
culture.
That's kind of really where it started.
I've already pissed some people off on this show who watch for saying things like that, but maybe we should, stop being slutty and like, I don't know, commit to someone. God forbid you even say that.
Or, you know, only have a slutty phase in
Yeah.
our youth, you know,
And-
like teens to 20s, and then grow out.
Yeah.
Or like Basil says, you know, he's one of our frequent guests, but like if you are going to be doing that, whatever, but like don't throw it in everyone's face and pretend that, oh,
It's
this is
so-
a healthy thing
yeah.
that everyone should be doing. Like do it on the download, do it in private.
Everyone should be an ethical slut.
Yeah, and like keep it,
Yeah.
you know, it's your private life.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's okay. I mean, you can be open. You can be openly a slut, but there is something to be said about, you know, talking about hookup culture as it's not really a positive thing. You know, you can. I mean, it's not. I mean, it causes a lot of issues, and you know, at least at the I mean, if the bare minimum is that you have to tell the person that you're sleeping with that you're trans, then I think that you might. And you don't feel comfortable telling them that, then you might not want to hook up with that person. You know, I'm just throwing it out there.
Good rule of thumb, I think. Good rule of thumb. So I wanted to bring up some new developments in legislation, and this story came out a couple days ago. So apparently, Utah is the latest state to ban gender affirming care for minors, which is, I would say, a huge win.
You mean transsexual surgeries and cross-sex hormones for minors?
Yes, for minors. Yeah.
Speaking of language.
Yeah, care, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Care.
Can you pull those curtains closer?
Yes, I got you. But yeah, you know, I think it's going to show that we are making some leeway in this fight. We're making some progress. There is pushback happening, thanks to people like Billboard Chris. I know because he's been really pushing to have legislation, and he's been talking with, you know, a lot of politicians and stuff around the country and in Canada as well to try to, you know, make some progress in that area. Because I don't know what else to do. You know, I know some people get mad at this idea and they say, oh, well, the government should stay out of these decisions entirely. But like, dude, we have laws in the book to protect children from child abuse, all sorts of child abuse, you know, or to not have them brought into strip clubs and things like that. You know, if you want to talk about the drag shows and kids and all that.
Yeah.
So I think this is a similar situation where you might need the government to at least step in a bit and to draw a line
start
here.
enforcing the rules that are on the books
that are already
kind of
there.
been letting go. When
Yeah.
it comes to medical malpractice, when it comes to letting children into establishments that have liquor licenses.
Yeah.
I know in Florida they're investigating this drag queen Christmas show that was going around.
Yeah.
They ended in Florida. They had 3 shows. I think it was in like Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and somewhere else. And there were some complaints to I think it was something like the Florida Board or Florida Regulatory Body for Business and Taxes or something. I can't remember what the name of the Florida state group was, but they said that they looked at, it looks like there might be some law breaking here, and we're going to investigate. And if we find, you know, prima facie evidence of law breaking, we will refer it to the state, you know, police for criminal prosecution. So, you know, that takes time, but we'll see what happens. You know, that was just last month. So we'll see if that goes like.
That's so yeah, legislation is where we are winning this fight. You're right. The Utah bill is great. And actually I think the Utah bill is good for a lot of reasons, because it puts a moratorium. It's not a ban. It puts a moratorium on any new people from being prescribed. As well as or having surgeries for minors as well. What that does, and it also allocates, and I think the governor said he's going to start get the legislator to allocate more resources to studies, to fund studies, to figure out what the best case scenario. So they're basically halting everything so that we can actually study the effects and study this stuff so we can actually give good information. And I know I'm talking to organizations and politicians as well across the country, and there's a lot of stuff like that coming. Like we're going to start funding studies and everything like that, like looking into what the actual the best approach for, you know, children with gender dysphoria is. And, you know, putting the moratorium on it is a good first step, because you know, if you don't know, you don't continue to go forward and push to say this, you know, we'll let you do this for now, but if the studies show that they're not right, then we'll ban it later. No, you put the moratorium in place now, in case those studies show that it's causing irreparable harm to these children, which a lot of people it is. And yeah, like you said, I mean, I have no idea how how we've been allowing anybody under the age of 18 to have life-altering elective surgeries, because they are elective. They're not life-saving. It's not life-saving medicine. It's an elective surgery that you can deal with until you reach adulthood. You just have to teach people to deal with that.
And it's not just figuring out the best way to like treat kids who actually have gender dysphoria, but it's figuring out which ones actually have that, because it's only going to be a small percentage of them who have that, where it's extreme enough where it persists and it's really detrimental to them, and which of them are just sucked into a trend, dealing with traumas, dealing with sexual abuse, dealing with those sorts of things,
or just experimenting as children,
or just experimenting. It's like we have to be able to weed out like who actually has like that mental disorder that needs to be dealt with, and who has something else going on. Where they think the trans thing is where they now can fit in, and it's like a form of like escapism, I think, for a lot of kids who are dealing with
it is.
They don't.
It's a lot of trauma.
Who's a gay teenager and a lesbian teenager instead of just being someone who has dysphoria? Because most, I think, gay and lesbian young adults.
Then when you add autism, struggle. It's even more complicated.
They struggle with it. Like I haven't done it, but I know, and I've spoken to many gay men who wore heels when they were kids and wanted to dress up and experiment, or preferred playing with dolls and all that stuff. And if they were growing up today, a lot of them say like, hey, I would have qualified for this diagnosis, and they would have pushed me in that direction. And those voices get silenced.
It's like every lesbian I've talked to.
Yes. Well,
tomboys. They're all tomboys.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It is figuring out which one it is. I mean, and which one is the rapid onset, because like the way I talk about, I mean, like I had known something was different. I like different stuff. Like I tried to dress on when I was 4 years old and everything like that, but not everybody that, feels the same way around the age of 4 is going to end up going on to be trans. It's very small. It's the square is not, or the square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square type thing. And so when you, and so you have to figure out which ones are actually going to persist. And that's almost an impossible task, I would say. You have to go through puberty to figure it out. And that's one of the issues. I mean, it took me 5 years after I started to explore at the age of like, I was like 28, 29 when I started to really explore who I was after I had gotten separated from my ex. And so it took me 5 years before I started hormones, because it was like, I need to make sure that like, what is this feeling that I've had since I was, 4 years old? And how am I going to progress further? And then finally, after I came out to my family and everything like that, it was finally like, I'm going to start taking hormones. But it wasn't until after a long period of exploration of who I was to figure that out.
Yeah, but also what the effects of those things could be on you, and you have to be aware of that before you make such a drastic decision. Like, because hormones and changing your body chemistry, like there are some negative side effects to those things too that you have to be aware of. They could cause other health complications, etc.
So. Well, people don't know that. I mean, how just taking testosterone down and like adding estrogen just creates a very different mental state. I mean, it puts you into a interesting state, because there was times like in my transition where I felt like I was going crazy, because I was just like acting in a way that I didn't even understand. I was like, what am I doing? Like, and so you have to learn to adapt to that stuff, and that's not easy too. And so you need a therapist that can kind of guide you through that to help you understand what these drugs are actually doing to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds very challenging, and especially now with therapists being so ideologically biased. Like you'd want to have like a really good therapist to go through that process with, and not somebody who's just hurting you through it like it's the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, I think
it's where everything that you say is that's normal. Oh, that's normal. That's normal. That's normal.
Some of them
that's normal. Just worry about something.
I think some of them are doing it because they really do care and they think it is the best thing. And I think some of them are doing it and deep down they know that this is not right, but they're scared to push back.
Because it's a lot of both of that,
question because they don't want to be canceled.
They don't want to lose their license.
They don't want to lose their licenses, So it's like that needs to change too. We need to create an environment where these therapists feel more comfortable pushing back, and there's no risk for them, and that if they do get attacked by the radicals, that we defend those therapists and we defend their license.
That's what they're doing to Jordan Peterson right now.
Oh yeah,
his license.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
We might see that here.
Yeah, it was actually Jeanette on the panel. She said, and she was right. She's like, I don't like to think that anybody is just maliciously evil. She goes, I think that the word inept is probably a better word because, most people are good and are trying to do the right thing, but a lot of people have bought into this ideology that this is the way to care for these people. This, like, again, it's like how you manipulate a parent to say, you can either have a dead child or a trans child. That is manipulation. So you want what's best for your child. I think society as a whole just wants what's best for people.
Yes,
and
so
so
we have to remember that old axiom on how the road to hell is paved.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely correct.
They have very good intentions, but really have no idea what the hell they're doing. And I will push back against Jeanette a little bit, and I will say most people probably want the best and mean well, but there are definitely a handful of people who are just straight up evil.
Cluster B?
Oh, yeah.
Cluster B, or just straight up psychopaths. And I think they do enjoy harming. They do enjoy inflicting suffering. They do enjoy the confusion and the manipulating of people and all that stuff. And we have to be aware that they're there and that they're going to corrupt the others around them and convince them that what they're doing is good because they get a kick out of it. They love it. Duping the light.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, to kind of shift points, go back where you had said, enforcing the laws that are currently on the books. I think that's a great point because there are so many laws that are currently on the books that aren't being enforced. Like you said, I mean, child abuse is on the books. Like you can look at that and determine like what would be considered child abuse in this case. And a lot of stuff that's happening could be considered child abuse. I mean, again, performing surgeries on 15-year-olds that are life altering is abuse and you're manipulating, especially like, and you mentioned autism. When the high percentage of these people have autism, then you're performing it on people that not only are they under the age of consent where they don't even have the cognitive ability to understand the action, their chosen, like the ramifications of their chosen actions. When you add in the spectrum on top of that, that's even putting more disregard for what, like they don't even understand as nearly as much of what these actions and the full ramifications are because they get so obsessed with what they're actually doing in this idea of being a boy, and they think that's what they're going to do when they get focused on that. And so there's a lot of that conversation that can be had as well. And actually, a little bit different too is they just said that one of the male who was apparently a trans woman, I don't know, that was in the women's locker room, she's being now charged with indecent exposure, which I think is great, because I'm like, if you are a male and you're flashing your penis around in a locker room, that's indecent exposure. We've had these laws on the books, just enforce them.
Yeah, just enforce them. It's not a new thing. Yeah, and you brought up the autism thing and all of that, and I know Chloe Cole has spoken about that as well in regards
she's on the spectrum too
to her situation. And anyone who has not watched it yet, I highly recommend you go watch her conversation with Jordan Peterson. And he asks some very, very good questions and kind of helps. It's
hard to watch though.
It is hard to watch. It's a difficult thing, but it's
painful subject matter.
It's important though. I think if people want to understand the connection between the gender confusion stuff and someone who might be on the autistic spectrum, and how I think a lot of the youth are in the autistic spectrum who are the ones getting pushed into this direction. It's like we have to know there is a connection there, and how do we deal with that?
Well, and what people don't realize too is, especially for females, a lot of the stuff, the autism diagnoses, especially for like what would be considered Asperger's, was all the diagnosis criteria initially was in males and how males present, and now they're starting to figure out that females don't actually present the same way when it comes to that, illness. So like I had Christina Buttons on my channel, and she discussed this and said, and if you don't know Christina Buttons, she's a writer on these types of issues for the Daily Wire.
We've met her before. She's awesome.
Okay, yeah. So just in case anybody in the audience didn't know either. So she she talks about it too. And when she was explaining what it felt like growing up with on the spectrum and not knowing what this was because the diagnosis criteria was not right. They thought it was all these different things, and how she would probably be labeled as trans today because she knows herself and would have grabbed onto that ideology and like thought that that's exactly who I am. But the way that she described like growing up in her body is exactly the way that I would describe how gender dysphoria feels to me. So it was just really interesting how the overlap happens.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, and what do you do in that case? Now you've got, basically somebody like yourself who is genuinely transsexual versus, Christina, who's just on the spectrum, having very similar descriptions of their internal experience. How can we expect doctors to parse that, especially among young people? It can't be done. You can't parse that. There's no, I mean, you just
and I think that's the key right there is that if you're talking about young people, a lot of young people, they, you kind of grow with it. And so that as you get, it just takes time. And so if you're having those feelings as a young female that's on the spectrum, you'll end up growing out of it. And so again, waiting until you grow up into adulthood is key. And that's why you can't, it's almost an impossible task to figure out who is going to desist and who's not. And so right now they're saying, they're basically saying that we're going to save the one and hurt the other 9 in this type of stuff, right? Because it's literally, I mean, the Lisa Lippman study shows that 80% would normally desist by the age of 16, and then like 90% would desist by the age of 18. So it's very that's why it's key that we just let these kids wait. You don't push this stuff on them, and you don't allow them to do this.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're in this culture where like we expect an immediate solution to all our problems. We want it now. Nobody wants to be told, hey, you just need to chill out for like 5 years and this problem will solve itself. Because that's not something, as Americans, especially and Westerners, we're just so used to having a ready-made solution for every problem.
Yeah.
And especially if people want to transition, a lot of these kids are very adamant and very aggressive in what this is what they want. They want it now. But they don't realize, because they're so young, that 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, you change. The person that you're not the same person. You don't want the same things. You have different values, and that's normal.
I'm thinking about me at like 24, 25, and how much just I've changed between then and now at 32.
So much change.
And then, man, thinking about myself at like 16, 17, like I thought I knew more than I actually did.
Teenager.
I was angsty too, and I was arrogant. A lot of young folks are like, we think we know and understand the world, and maybe we understand some things, and we might be quite brilliant for our age, but we're still underdeveloped, and we still don't really know what the hell we want or how reality works.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, just think about how many. I mean, this is what's really bad about this too, is like all these people that are like talking about like having kids later in life. Not very many teens actually want kids later in life, and then they grow up and then they're like, oh my god, now I want kids, and but they've caused this irreversible harm to where they can't. I know Chloe's kind of talked about it in a lot of stuff too, where she's like, I can't even breastfeed my kids, if I have them, if she can even still have kids. It's just biologically. Yeah. And so we just don't, I mean, you're making these decisions for children that they will probably, they don't even know what they're going to feel in the years to come. Like you said, like even in your 20s, you don't necessarily know what you're going to want, in your 30s and everything like that. And it is one of those things where we have this culture, and especially the, internet culture and everything, like right now we have a very self-gratification culture to where everything, you need it now. I mean, this is why we have credit cards and everything like that. You can't like just save up and buy something anymore. You put it on a credit card and then it's yours, right? It's like all of this is all cultural based, and even just transitioning of itself. I always say, it's like first world problems, because you don't have these issues in areas where they're just struggling to survive. They don't worry about, they're not arguing about like somebody's pronouns. They're just like trying to figure out when the next meal is going to be. I think it showed it the best in Matt Walsh's documentary when he went to Africa and talked to the tribe. Like they're like, "What are you talking about? Like we don't worry about that stuff."
Yeah. Not a thing.
Well, and it's also, I mean, it's a lot of this is being pushed as well because it's the progressive narrative right now is, and it's because a lot of what you're seeing is a lot of, you know, upper middle class white progressive women are, you know, supporting their kids or pushing their kids into it. We kind of call that trans housing by proxy because it's like they've been told so much that they are oppressors. And so that then they can now say, oh, I have a trans child and my kids in the queer community and I'm so supportive and I'm such a good mother and it's just like lady, you have too much time on your hands, okay?
Too much time on your hands.
Painful to watch.
And it's definitely cultural. Brent, you just brought up an interesting story here.
Oh yeah, well I was gonna see, but I wanted to ask Sarah what she thought about this.
Well, this kind of shows how cultural it is that we really are just trying to normalize this. And think about how many kids play video games, but apparently now in The Sims 4, they allow players to give characters transgender top surgery, chest scars, and that sort of thing. And first thing I thought about this is like, wouldn't this like exacerbate someone's dysphoria or something like that? Like, isn't the point to not emphasize the scars? But I see a lot of the ones who transition, they almost kind of wear it as like a badge of honor now.
Well, it's to they're trying to normalize it, or they are trying to wear it as like a badge of honor. And I think the thought behind that is to be like, oh, I'm represented. Like, you know, like you have to be a representative in everything. You see it in all across movies and everything. If like not everybody in the, you know, across the community and it's not like the most diverse movie ever, then it's going to get, you know, canceled and all this stuff. So adding this is just like, oh my God, I see myself in a video game. Like it's a validation. Like you have validation because you see yourself in a video game. I actually just filmed before I came on, I was filming a reel it's talking about that as well, but it's talking about as well, even the new Hogwarts video game, the J.K. Rowling, like the Harry Potter game, you can play as a trans character.
No way.
Really?
And it's like, what is the difference between a trans character and a regular character? Like that doesn't make any sense. It's literally, it's virtue signaling because it's like, isn't the point of transition to blend into society? So like, yes, when I used to play like Grand Theft Auto and used to play games where you could choose, yes, I would play as a female character, but I didn't need a trans character in there because I could just play as a female character.
Right,
You know?
exactly. Like it sounds like it would just exacerbate the dysphoria.
Yeah. Also, this idea of needing that constant outside validation, to me, all that shows is how insecure people are and their identities. And it's like, someone like you, the fact that you're able to have these conversations, the fact that you don't expect people to play this sort of mental game with you where we must see you exactly as the sex, because you're secure. You understand, like, I'm a male, I'm presenting as a female, but I'm not actually a female. And you're like, I'm not trying to control someone else's reality and how they perceive me. I'm comfortable in myself. This is who I am. It's like you need that outside validation constantly, and it shows you're not like fragile. Whereas a lot of these other ones, it just tells me that they're fragile. They can't handle any confrontation. They can't handle any disagreement. They have to see themselves validated everywhere amongst everyone. That is not possible. You can't control people's mind.
No, you can't control, and that goes back to again compelled speech and everything like that. It's like if you don't validate me 100% of the time, and it is interesting. I wrote about this in Human Events. I wrote a piece on Dylan Mulvaney and the Alta stuff in Human Events, and only a paragraph is about the Dylan Mulvaney stuff, but it's more about cultural stuff as a whole. But I talked about that. I said, me nor Dylan will ever know what it's like to be a woman. We will not know what it's like to grow up as a woman. I don't know what a woman feels like. Does every woman even feel the same type stuff? And I said, the issue is, why is it so important to do this? And I said, it's shame. These people, they feel so shame that they were born male or they were born female if they're, female to male. Yeah. And so they feel so much shame that they were born in the opposite sex that it's like they have to, force everybody to believe their reality, and it's not true. And actually, if you scroll down towards the bottom, I actually say, it's interesting because they will call me self-hating for even writing this article. Yeah, actually, right there, for writing this article, for embracing the fact that I'm a male and embracing biological reality.
Yeah.
It's
so,
crazy.
but at one point, did you have shame for being born a male?
Well, I don't think it was ever shame in the fact that I was born male. I think mostly what I was feeling was confusion.
Yeah.
Like I was confused as to why I was, wanted to present a certain way, wanted to present as a girl, and why I wanted that. I think I've never really felt shame in who I was. At the same point in time, I probably felt more shame over the disorder that I had because
you wanted to be comfortable as a male, but
yeah. Well, and for the longest, I mean, when I growing up, I mean, without really doing too much exploration and deep dive, I thought, it was a fetish, and it was just I like to, dress in pretty things and stuff like that, and it might have been a fetish. And as I explored that, that's why I started to come to the realization that, I started off just, dressing to see if that changed anything. And then it wasn't even about like sexual arousal or anything anymore. It was like being more me. And so then I would go out in public, and then and that's kind of how you start the exploration, is like you go out in public and you try to, and you pass, and then at the point when you finally start living as the opposite sex, then you're like, okay, does this make me feel more comfortable to be like this, or is this just something that I can handle in any other way? And you just start questioning all of that, and it's kind of the progress to where I took to be like, okay. But yeah, I mean, I kept this thing hidden for 25, maybe 28 years of my life. I mean, the first person I ever told about this was my ex, and that was back in 2014. Yeah. And so I was like 28 years old when I first told somebody. So yeah, I would say that I was kind of ashamed as to who I thought growing up and thinking that I had this weird fetish or something like that, that I was weird like that. And so now I think I've grown to think that it wasn't the fact that I was male. It was the fact that I thought it was weird of what I was doing, what my brain was telling me I should be. And now it's just like, I'm comfortable with who I am.
Which, I mean, is something that we all have to work towards,
for sure,
acquiring, over growth and development.
Yeah, no, as gay men, I think we can relate to that aspect of it.
Yeah,
for sure. And we also go through that sort of ashamed process, although maybe it is a little different, because I think for us, we are ashamed of who we are and why we want to, act the way that we
cuddle with other men,
be with other men.
Well, I get that too, because that's the thing is I'm bisexual, so it's like, even for being a male and wanting to be with men, it's kind of like, well, this is not. It plays into that same thing as well.
Yeah.
So I did get that.
The last thing I want to ask you about, and it ties into this stuff too, and this idea of shame, is your religious beliefs. You are very openly Catholic. You're a person of faith. I think we've chatted a bit about this before on Twitter, but talk about that a bit, and like, I guess how do you reconcile being someone who's transsexual and bi, with your religious beliefs and your faith?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done stuff, and I've about just different interpretations of the Bible, and how different words in the Bible have been translated to mean different things throughout history. And so you can kind of look at it. At the end of the day, I think, I believe in Jesus. I don't necessarily believe in some of the interpretations, I guess. And really, I consider myself Catholic because that's the faith that I grew up in. It's still the church that I go to. I mean, I don't go to church often, but when I do go to church, it's usually a Catholic church, and I'm very, it's not bad. We have a pretty good one here, couple good ones here in Atlanta. And so, but at the end of the day, also, I've started to kind of be like, it's probably the best way for me to describe myself as Catholic, but I don't like government. And so the Catholic Church is set up like a government. So I've always been kind of critical of the fact that you have a pope that can change the interpretations on a whim and everything like that. So I'm like, it just seems kind of odd to me. So I guess I'm not a good Catholic. I guess I'm more non-denominational Christian than anything, with my own beliefs and values. And I do believe, if you believe in God, you believe in Jesus, that at the end of the day, Jesus died for our sins, and that, only God can judge us. And so we just live and I believe that if you are a good person, you are, kind to others, and you're doing the right things, then you will still get salvation at the end. I mean, you will still make it into the kingdom, no matter how it was. And I believe that God made me like this for a reason. And maybe it's what I'm doing right now, trying to protect kids. It's all led up to this point where I'm out here trying to protect children because I had this unique experience to say, this is not the glamorous life that they're trying to push onto you or trying to tell you that it is. Like, it's still a difficult life to live if you transition.
I think that's how I view it too. Like, your unique perspective is something like only you can share with others, because I don't understand what that's like. I've never had gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. And I think I said this to Shapeshifter as well, as someone who went through the surgery and had all of those issues and problems, and kind of knows what it's like to be perceived as a woman, but also knows what it's like to be a man because he's a man.
Yeah.
That does give you a unique perspective that the vast majority of people on the planet won't be able to share with others and to explain and to get others to understand. So then we can try to navigate what's going on here. So you very much serve a role.
Absolutely. And that goes back to what I was talking about detransitioners earlier. All the detransitioners out there now are providing a great service that by speaking out, because the more voices that they get out there, the more people they will affect, and the more people that they affect, the more we kind of stomp this out. Because like when they transitioned, there weren't people out there speaking out about the hazards. A lot of those people were either silenced or they just weren't out. There weren't enough out there because it's kind of a new trend. And so we need more people like that speaking out because they have that unique experience to say, this happened to me, whether as an adult or as a child, either way. It's like, if it happens, if you transition as an adult and you end up regretting it, then what hope do we have for our kids that are transitioning? How can we stop that from happening?
Yeah, they also get crap from both sides. The radical activist types cast them out and hate them and attack them, and even a lot of conservatives will never totally accept them either, or they blame them, especially the M to Fs. They seem to be particularly kind of like demonized and all of that. But also this I think there's a kind of a difficulty in trusting that many of them have, and I understand that. Like, are they being used as just like these political pawns for someone's argument, that they're trying to make this stuff? And I wouldn't want to feel that way either. So, I know Casey Miller has posted threads about this stuff before too, and it's just how detransitioners are talked about and how their stories are told is also important. And every time we bring one on, I always like to also ask them about other things that they're interested in or that are a part of who they are that have nothing to do with that.
Speaking of, I wanted to ask Sarah about her thoughts on the war in Ukraine. As a combat veteran, you were in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I guess that'll be the last thing.
No, because I was like, ooh, Jared's a military person.
Yeah, I mean, I'm anti-war. I think that, so my views, I'm a minarchist, which means I'm basically think that the only thing that the government should do is provide a standing military to protect our country. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not for foreign wars. I'm not for foreign involvement. I'm for literally protecting our borders and our country. So first thing is, I don't think we should be, providing aid and support to any country in the world, even Ukraine right now, financially or anything else. I think that still shows that we're favoring one side over the other. I think that Putin should have never did what he did. But I also think that, NATO and its allies and everything like that led up to this, gave him every excuse in the book to be able to do what he did. Because when you looked at NATO countries were never supposed to push east of Germany, and so it kind of started to look like an invasion could possibly happen against Russia. It could be an attack on Russia. It's like the same thing as what if Russia put or China put arms within striking distance of the U.S.
or bases
Bay of Pigs, Cuba.
Canada.
I mean, we know. I mean, we went the Bay of Pigs. We attacked. We struck back, and so we kind of have led to this point. And I mean, Ukraine has suppressed gay people. They're not LGBT friendly. They have. I mean, they've been in a civil. So staged a coup. I mean, that's other things. We backed a coup back in 2013 that caused what used to be a pro-Putin president in Ukraine to add a anti-Putin president in Ukraine, and that's why there's been fighting. Like, there's been a civil war happening in the Donbass region in the Ukraine since 2013. And so when you look at it, like Zelensky and them, they've been literally killing their own people because they've been at this war. And I mean, I think the only way that you can end this peace, like finally end this, is and it's been proposed, so it's not even anything radical. It's like you just let Russia have the Donbass region because all those people are pro-Russia anyways.
Most
and then
Most of them,
sure,
and so they're
them identify more with being Russian.
Yeah, and so that's, I mean, end the civil war that's been happening there and allowed that to take place, and then just, have a ceasefire, just stop what's going on. I think that there's reasonable solutions, but nobody wants to negotiate right now. And now that we're sending tanks and everything like that over there, I think we're getting into a really strong territory where we could be, in World War III with a nuclear power, and it's really scary because I'm not on either side. I think all sides have just been. I think Putin should have never did what he did in the first place. I think he's crazy in and of himself. But yeah, I think we shouldn't be so heavily supporting a country like Ukraine in this fight. I think we should be staying neutral in all of it.
Yeah, and it just seems like our leaders are just intent to keep throwing fuel on that fire. At first they were not going to send tanks. Too expensive, too hard to train. People don't understand. You can't just give Ukrainian tanks and then expect them to be able to operate them and use them effectively in a theater of war. Like, I was reading this article from a general who was a tank operator, and he was also a higher, he ordered around the battalions of tanks. And, he was like, you have to train these men for months together just to get them to operate, because it's a crew. A tank is not just one guy. It's a crew of people. They have to be able to work together really well as a singular unit. And then you have to be able to take that single unit, that single tank, and then integrate their functioning into a larger group, and then take that group and integrate it. And that all just takes months and months and years of time and practice and training.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to give these guys tanks and a 6-week course.
Yeah. No, you're right. Well, and I mean, I forget what I saw the other day too. It's like we've spent more money in Ukraine than we spent in like the first 10 years in Afghanistan or something like that.
It's insane.
We're spending
billion-ish now.
Wow.
It's that much.
The U.S. is over $30 trillion in debt, and we're spending money in other countries at an exasperated rate. Like, that's our money. That's our taxpayer money. That's going to be placed on generations to come. Like, we should probably be worried about, eliminating the debt and not like supporting, a proxy war in another country.
And it's just so funny that we get out of Afghanistan and all of a sudden we jump right into Ukraine. I'm like, can we just have 6 months, a year, 5, where we're not engaged in a war?
That's too much. That's too much to ask, Brent.
Well, you can't. Well, and you can't anyways, because like, even it's, people don't see it like this either. I mean, just jump to another area. Look at Israel and the Palestinians. It's like, we fund Israel's Iron Defense System, the Iron Dome defense system, and then we, under the Obama administration, we gave the Iranians a bunch of money back. Then we also gave the Palestinians COVID money. And then just so happens to be like a few years into Biden's administration, like rockets get sent into Israel. So we're fighting a proxy war in Israel against ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, we're literally, our money is being placed to send rockets into our own defense system for Israel.
This is why I think, for the most part, well, the banks for one, but also the arms dealers are.
Well, the military industrial complex is,
they profit off this, because think about it. Like, if it's your business to make and sell weapons, you need war, because you need those weapons to get used up so you can sell more weapons. So if there isn't a war, you're out of business. And if there are no reasons to start a war, you might be more inclined to create some reasons to start a war so you can stay in business. It's just, to me, it's common sense. And this was something I realized when I was very young in high school. I'm just like, hey,
now the new thing,
like people who make weapons might want to start wars to sell weapons.
Yeah. Well, that was the big thing on Iron Man. The first movie in Iron Man. Yeah, right. Tony Stark was an arms dealer and was like making money off war. And it was like the whole point. And then politicians are making tons of money off it too because they're getting kickbacks and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's crazy. I don't know what to do. I mean, I think we're just gonna we can't really impact that conflict ourselves, but just to observe and sort of generally be anti-war.
That's all we can do is observe and talk about it.
And so, speaking of, you are going to a libertarian anti-war protest coming up. Do you want to give some details on that?
Yeah, so I'll be in DC. I don't know if I'll be speaking or anything like that, but there is the Libertarian Party, and it's really interesting because I think it's the People's Party are hosting this anti-war rally at the Lincoln Memorial on February 19th in DC, and it's going to be some great speakers, everything like that, and just basically, talking about they'll be talking about the war in Ukraine. They'll be talking about just being anti-war and why, like what we were just kind of talking about. So it's going to be a great event, but yeah, definitely come out. It's going to be a lot of great people there. And it's funny because this is one of those issues where people don't realize, like, when you can put your differences aside, like agree to disagree on like everything else for a specific cause. The Libertarian Party is like free values, mostly anarchist. And I think the People's Party, it might not be the People's Party, but I know that they're working with like communists and stuff like that believe the exact opposite everything else, but we're working together to make anti-war stuff together. It's actually really fun. It's interesting to see because people don't think that you can work with people that disagree with you on literally everything, but you can work together on one issue.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to see the libertarians and communists come together to stop war.
Oh boy, I guess with that,
that's a good place to end it.
We'll wrap it up. Yeah. Sarah, remind everyone where they can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, so the best place to go, you can see like the article you presented earlier, and all my other articles that I've written are on my website, sarahhigdon.com. That has links to all my stuff, and then just go to there, go to my links page, and then off the top, my YouTube is just youtube.com/Sara Higdon. Twitter and Instagram are both Sara Higdon with an _ after it.
Gotcha. Awesome. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us again and having this very important conversation. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
And we'll be back again soon with another one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share the video, give us money. We love you. Stay safe, stay sane. Bye-bye.